At 5'10" and 187 pounds, Steve Largent wasn't your typical NFL star. He didn't have the speed to burn past defenders or the size to dominate jump balls.
He was labeled as a slow white guy.
But with his precise routes, hands like glue, and an intensity that bordered on obsession, he turned these so-called weaknesses into strengths. So how did Jerry Rice's idol become the NFL's all-time leader in catches, yards, and touchdowns when he retired? This is the story of Steve Largent's improbable journey to greatness. While Largent retired number one in every major NFL receiving stat, his career almost ended as soon as he was drafted. He was an All-American at Tulsa University, and led the nation in touchdown receptions both years. But he would not be drafted by the Oilers till the 4th round. And then, after only 4 preseason games, the Oilers had seen enough. Largent was released. Bum Phillips, the Oilers head coach, would later say it was the worst trade he ever made. I agree. To be fair though, if you crafted the perfect receiver in a lab, I doubt he'd look like this. But while he may have not had a 4.3 40-yard time, it was actually in the 4.6 range, similar to Jerry Rice. This should not fool you.
He's faster than what people think. He has a lot of things going for him, and I think one thing going for him that's great is that everyone says he doesn't have great speed.
So after his meeting with Bum Phillips, Largent thought he was done. Then the Seahawks would trade for him at the final hour. But again, he'd face obstacles. At his first practice in Seattle, he did not play well. He thought he was about to get cut for the second time in 1 week. The reality was, Largent was sleep deprived. As the sole caretaker for his mother and 3 siblings, everything rested on his shoulders, which made securing a roster spot on the Seahawks even more important. His parents got divorced when he was 6, and his mother remarried at age 9, but the man was an abusive alcoholic. Having an absent father left Largent without a male role model, so his coaches would fill that role. None more significant than his college offensive coordinator, Jerry Rome. The Seahawks had hired Rome as a QB coach, who was one of the few who knew what Largent was capable of. Without Rome, there likely would have been no Steve Largent, because he was the one that convinced the Seahawks to trade for him. The other benefit was that Rome implemented the passing game from Tulsa into Seattle's game plan. So not only did he help Largent make the team, he built a system he could get comfortable in, and Largent's dedication to practice and preparation would help him thrive as a pro. He would catch 200 machine-propelled passes and went through all of his routes after every practice. But that didn't mean just running an out route 50 times. He would reenact the play being called in the huddle, lining up, running the route, and then returning to the huddle over and over again. And with this, Largent would become an immediate success with the Seahawks, finishing his rookie year with 54 receptions, which was 3rd best in the NFC. He was nicknamed Yoda for his ability to catch anything thrown at him. The Jedi skill was developed from skeet shooting, where he learnt to focus on the edge of the skeet. So in football he applied the same principle, focus on the tip of the ball. Although not extremely fast, his speed was deceptive, and he was able to maintain that speed when making cuts on his routes.
He comes off the line and he really has a great tempo, and he can stop and change direction and speed up so quickly that he really throws defensive backs for a loss a lot of times.
He was excellent at selling the route, then cutting and losing the defender in the process. Then, with his elite hands, nothing was getting dropped. And remember, this was an era where they did not wear gloves. As I already mentioned, on top of his flawless route running and glue-like hands, Largent worked really hard. Here's another example of that. He once missed the majority of a week's practice due to the birth of his son, who was born with a spinal condition. But then on Friday night of that week, Largent showed up, asking for the plays that were practiced the days he'd missed. He then went out on a cold November night and ran through every play. Upon arrival in Seattle, he'd quickly form a connection with quarterback Jim Zorn, and they'd thrive on the field. They'd have the most touchdowns of any quarterback-wide receiver pair in their first 4 seasons during that stretch. In 1983, however, his best friend would be benched for quarterback Dave Craig, but the Seahawks actually prospered. They made the playoffs for the first time that season. They toast the Broncos, then go on to face Miami as 17.5-point underdogs. But Yoda seemed to fall to the dark side that day. Largent went 3 quarters without a single catch. However, the Seahawks were still up 17-13 late in the 4th. After an interception and subsequent score by the Dolphins, the Seahawks were now down 20-17. This was their final drive. Despite having a quiet game up to that point, Largent would begin to cook, finishing with a perfect post route in double coverage that led to the final score.
Look at that batter. One of the best routes he ever ran.
They'd pull off the huge upset in Miami, but ultimately fall to the Raiders in the conference game. When he retired, he had NFL records in receptions, touchdowns, yards, consecutive games with a catch, 50-plus catch seasons, and 1,000-yard seasons. The only other receivers to retire number 1 in receptions, yards, and touchdowns Don Hutson, and Jerry Rice. And what makes this even more impressive is that Largent was doing this alone. He was the only star offensive weapon for the most part in his career, so you knew he was getting the ball, but you still couldn't stop him. That's what the greats do. Although he's one of the greatest receivers ever, his most memorable play might actually be for one of the greatest tackles in NFL history. We're told to turn the other cheek when we're wronged, but some wrongs require payback. In 1988, Steve Largent was on the receiving end of an illegal hit by Mike Harden that left him unconscious on the field, concussed, and with 2 cracked teeth. I mean, Harden's going in there with his forearm, a total cheap shot. Largent was not going to let this one go. During a rematch later that season, Largent would deliver a nasty, but legal, blindside hit after Harden intercepted a pass. The one time throwing an interception was a blessing. The scriptwriters couldn't have planned it better. The cherry on top was that Harden fumbled the ball and Largent recovered it. The whole play was actually negated away due to a defensive holding penalty, but Largent delivered justice, and he said it's his favourite play of his career. It also had further implications. The two teams were in the same division back then, both with a record of 7-7. The winner would likely make the playoffs, and well, that's what happened. The Seahawks won, and eventually made the playoffs that year. That, folks, is poetic justice. Largent is often forgotten, largely due to the great receivers who came shortly after him, as well as poor team success. However, consistency was his middle name, with 8 1,000-yard seasons. The man who was too small and too slow finished number 1 in every major receiving category when he retired in 1989, proving it isn't just your physical abilities that determine success.